This happened 2 nights ago, and I'm still replaying it over and over in my head. I'm a pretty predictable person with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if this was a random occurrence or if someone knew my nightly routine. I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband Rob gets up for work before me, so he goes to bed before I do. I usually go to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and TV in the living room and take my dog to the back door to let her out. She's tiny and old and poses no threat to anyone. The door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck, a few steps down, is a small path that leads to the gate, which we always keep chained and locked. Every single night before opening the door, I peek out of the window right next to it without disturbing the blinds and turn on the deck light. I never expect anyone to be there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do, every night, kinda like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee. I know no one is back there, but if I don't check, then that's going to be the one time there is actually someone hiding there, you know? Hey, I watch a ton of horror films, and it's pitch black outside at night where I live. So a few nights ago I got ready for bed. I went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me. I peek out of the window and flip on the light. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s or 40s standing off to the side of the door facing it. I see him raise his arm up and hold a screwdriver above his head as soon as the light went on, preparing for someone to open the door. I screamed, "Rob, get up! Get the gun!" as loud as I could, which startled the guy, and he jumped over the rail of the deck, even though he was right next to the stairs, and then ran off. My husband ran out of our bedroom with his gun. He called the police, and they showed up within 5 minutes. They drove around trying to find the guy, but no luck. The guy broke the lock on our gate to get in. He also pried open the back screen door, which we always keep locked as well. If I would have opened the door without looking out first, I might be dead. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in, or if he was waiting for me to open the door like I do every night. Either way, it was fucking terrifying. My parents are buying us outdoor security cameras this week as an early birthday present for Rob. I was driving back to my college from my family's house after Thanksgiving break. I was traveling through a rural area in the Midwest, and I suddenly had an urge to piss badly. I was reading all the road signs I came across to see if there was any nearby towns that I could stop to find a gas station or something. Unfortunately, the nearest town was about 30-ish miles away, and I had to piss so badly. It was unbearable. I finally made the decision to get off at the next exit I found, even though they don't lead to any towns. Shortly after I pulled off on the next exit, I came across a gravel road. I thought it was perfect because I didn't want to get into trouble for exposing myself in front of anybody. It was a very private road. Just so you're all aware, I'm female. It is very difficult for females to pee on the side of the road. I thought the best course of action would be to take my empty McDonald's cup and pee into that. I did just that, inside of my car, just in case anyone drove down the lonely road. I finished my business and dumped the cup. I did not litter. I only dumped the contents into the grass on the side of the road. I was starting my car and getting ready to turn my car back around the way I came, when I saw a bright red car speeding down the road I was on. It startled me, but they drove right on past. I thought to myself it must be the locals messing around. I started to drive off, when I saw a dingy, rusted red pickup truck coming down the road after the car. They too just drove past, but as they did, I saw 2 male passengers staring right at me. This freaked me out, but I told myself all the more reason to get a move on. I still kept my eye on the pickup truck though, and saw them turning around coming straight at me. This freaked me out so much I decided the best course of action would be to drive in their direction, continuing on the gravel road, as opposed to turning around and giving them the opportunity to chase after me. I drove right by them again. and saw that they were grinning at me. I was so scared that I hit the gas, which on a gravel road doesn't do much. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that they were following me. I was freaking out bad. My hands were shaking. My foot was flooring the accelerator. I then reached for my phone. Now, I'm not the type of person to call 911 just for any situation. In fact, I was scared to call 911 because I was afraid I was just being paranoid. But as I looked in my rearview mirror again, I saw them gaining on me. I then dialed the police. When the operator picked up, I explained to her what was happening. During this call, the men in the pickup truck were so close I couldn't see their front tires. I was sliding all around the gravel road, trying to stay on the phone with the operator. She was giving me directions to the nearest town, which was several miles away. They followed me the entire way there, until I finally reached the police station. I saw them turn around very quickly, because they knew I was out of their reach. I definitely learned my lesson from this, and I think from now on, I'll stick to peeing in public restrooms. I am female, and this story takes place in 1993, when I and my twin sister CJ were both 9. Our next door neighbor was a witch. We fully believed that growing up. One time we drove our Barbie Jeep down the sidewalk, and she called the cops on us for being on her property. To the adults, she was just a mean old lady, but to my sister and I, she was a witch, and the subject of many late-night flashlight under the blanket ghost stories. Needless to say, nobody was incredibly sad when she passed away. Her son kept the house, not planning to sell. He visited once in a while, and the house turned a little scraggly, to my parents' dismay. The adults never noticed the strange things that occurred in the meantime, but CJ and I sure did. The witch had a huge backyard, more than 500 feet. It was overgrown, and our backyard had tall bushes hiding most of it from view. But we would notice strange things like lawn chairs and blankets folded and shoved behind a rock and food bags. We told ourselves that it was the witch's ghost. Fast forward to summer, and there was wild lavender growing in the backyard. We wanted it pretty badly to make crowns and such, but our parents had forbade us from going in there. One day we got lucky. Dad was running some errands, and Mom was sitting in the front room taking a nap because of a migraine. She banished us to our backyard. CJ was wearing her pink overall shorts. This is important to remember. There were no parents in sight, and we were up and over the witch's 6-foot chain-link fence in a matter of seconds. And 2 minutes later, we were engrossed in weaving flower braids. We heard a dry, raspy cough coming from a blue tarp, and to our horror and dismay, we then noticed it started to rustle and shake, and then he emerged. A huge man with scraggly red hair, dirty sweatpants and jean jacket. He was exposed and playing with himself. Well, I was frozen to the ground, and it wasn't until CJ screamed that I realized he had started to move towards us. I started running, practically flew over the fence, but one of CJ's overall straps got stuck. An almighty tug ripped it as she came tumbling over. Her forehead connected with my nose and it shattered. We flew into the house, and I heard wild laughing coming from the other side of the fence. Mom was promptly woken up. The police were called. Inspection of the backyard turned up nothing, except over 50 photos of CJ and I. We never saw that man again. As a kid, I liked to sit on my little mini playground, as I used to call it, and read. I actually look back on this and laugh, as now I'm a lot more isolated and an indoor person. My dad got home around 6, so my mom took us to and from school. When my mom was parking her car, she pointed out a creepy guy in a car in front of hers. He was just looking at us. She ushered us inside and brushed it up to just a weird coincidence or something like that. She still kept a close eye on me from the kitchen window, but she had to do something and left the kitchen. Now my mom was cautious because she had a creepy experience with a pedophile herself. From the top of the platform I was on next to the slide, I suddenly saw a strange man in our backyard. Upon noticing him, the man spoke. I don't remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey kiddo, I have some Goosebumps books in my car if you want to read them with me." My mom and dad had drilled stranger danger into my head, and I was a really smart kid for my age, so I tried to tell the guy off myself. I know, stupid decision, but I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The guy kept insisting that I come read with him, and I kept saying no. Eventually, the guy pretended to get a cell phone call and claim it was from my mom. He told me she said to get into his car, and he'll take me to the bookstore. I knew that there was no reason for her to ask someone to take me somewhere, so I just ignored him. He began to approach me. This was before we got a fence, so I was out in the open. He grabbed my arm and dragged me to his car, but just then, as God himself gave me a miracle, a police car came down the road and saw what he was doing. The guy let me go and sped off. The officer chased him and eventually caught him. My mom came rushing out when she heard the sirens. The guy claimed to be my dad and that my mom was abusing me. The officer knew my family well and called his bluff. I'm seriously glad that officer was there just then. I can't explain it in any other way than a miracle, because if he hadn't been there, I very well could have been abducted by a pedophile and never heard from again. I grew up in a suburb of LA County in Southern California. It had a very small Midwestern town type of feel, nothing like you get near the city of Los Angeles. I'm female and I was about 9 years old at the time. It was the mid-1980s. My parents had bought a house a couple of years prior that was built in the 1930s. There was a playhouse in the backyard that resembled the main house. It was probably a little over 5 feet high when you walked into it. It was just a room built with the same materials as the house. It had a real roof, walls, plaster, carpet, windows, door, etc. The original owners obviously had built it for children. My best friend lived next door, and she was a couple of years older than me. Well, we had talked about spending the night at this playhouse for about a year, and we finally got up the nerve to do it. My dad set everything up for us. He put a battery-operated light in there and cleaned it up a bit. To give you an idea of what the yard was like, there were 2 large orange trees that had dropped several leaves around the yard. The yard was fenced in. There was a detached garage that led to the back alley, and a woodshed next to the playhouse that had a gate that also led out to the alley. Around the side of the house, there was a shorter gate about 3 feet high that led to the front yard. Everything was very old. We never really closed the door leading from the yard to the garage all the way because it was old and swollen, and you had to slam its shutter open if you latched it. We would just close it enough to where it would stick a little, but we never pulled it shut all the way. The small gate on the side of the house that led to the front yard was also hard to open or close. You had to lift it up to really get it to move because it would stick to the ground. So nighttime rolls around and we're set up with our sleeping bags, having a great time playing Mad Libs and listening to the radio. All the while we stopped several times thinking that we heard someone walking around outside. A couple of times I called out for my dad because it sounded like the footsteps of a heavier person. My dad is 6'3". No one answered, and it wasn't uncommon for us to get spooked because we were both nuts for horror films. Usually I would open the door and look outside, but something just creeped me out enough to where I didn't want to do that. We tried looking out the windows, but we had the light on so we couldn't see very well. Being as young as we were, we didn't think to turn off the light so we could see out better without being seen. We sort of just brushed it off like we were probably scaring ourselves, like we usually did. We finally decided to turn off the radio and the light and just lay there getting ready to go to sleep. Shortly after we did, we both sort of bolted up in our sleeping bags and started to say to each other, "Okay, someone is really out there." We honestly just sat there grabbing onto each other listening. We had a small terrier, but we ruled out that it was her pretty quickly. First, you could hear, even from my friend's house next door, every time the dog came in and out of the dog door. It was metal and would swing several times and was really annoying, and we hadn't heard the dog come out. Second, the footsteps that we heard on the leaves were not from a dog. They were not from a child either. They were from someone older. We kept hearing it, and they got closer to the playhouse, stopped, then start again and get further away. This went on for what felt like 20 minutes, but it was probably closer to 5. When finally it sounds like all hell breaks loose. We hear the dog come out of the dog door and begin barking as if she's snapping right at someone's heels. Then we hear the side gate leading to the front yard, the one that you have to pick up where it drags on the ground open. We hear it drag. We immediately dart out of the door of the playhouse and see that the gate is open, and also see the dog running out. The dog couldn't have opened the gate regardless. However, even if she could, a dog would push the gate open. The gate had been pulled open toward the backyard. We just started running out toward the front yard. My friend was in front of me. The dog was way ahead of us at this point, and we couldn't see her anymore. What I noticed while I was running was the door leading from the backyard to the garage was open. Not wide open, it was only ajar about 4 to 5 inches. When I got to where the side gate was, I heard the garage door slam shut. We kept running and saw the dog coming back toward the front yard. My friend grabbed her and we started ringing the front doorbell frantically. In all this commotion, my friend and I had both commented that it could have been my parents playing a joke on us, trying to scare us. That was clearly not the case. My mom came to the door half asleep and very confused about why we were out front with the dog. My dad was sleeping upstairs. It was odd for him to be home at night, but he had been on vacation, which is one of the reasons he was so willing to take the time to set up the playhouse for us. We woke up my dad to check things out, and when we all went to the backyard, the garage door was still shut. There were 2 people out in the yard with us. One clearly ran out the side gate when the dog came out, and the other most likely had hidden in the garage and watched us run off. We figured they probably exited the garage, slamming the door shut, then went out the other gate or jumped the fence heading out to the alley. My parents were a bit skeptical of this story. I honestly think that for a few minutes they thought we were goofing around. Again, we were big-time horror fans and loved being scared, often scaring each other. Then my mom swore it was probably my friend's younger brother trying to scare us. They decided not to call the police. The next day though, my mom called my friend's mom. They were best friends, and her mom was a bit creeped out by this because she said her son was home with her the entire night and he was only 10 at the time. He wasn't part of any prank on us. We talk about it to this day with our parents, and they feel now that they should have called the police, but hindsight is 20/20, I guess. I also want to add that we lived in a really nice neighborhood, but our street seemed to be the cutoff point. Our side of the street was lined with some pretty decent homes, while across the street were a bunch of small apartment buildings with at least 4 units each. Sometimes you would run into some pretty shady people who lived in these apartments. My theory is that someone in one of these apartments across the street had made our way back into our place. I could be wrong, but it does seem like the only explanation. This happened when I was about 13 years old. One weekend, my parents and I were out of town for work, so I was staying with a friend who lived across the street. Every morning I would wake up and go let the dogs out, feed them, and clean the litter box. Then my friend and I would go play for the rest of the day, sporadically checking on the house. One morning my friend and I woke up very early, still dark out, and looked across the street at my house. Our electric garage kept opening and closing all by itself, constantly, and one of my dogs runs out of the garage. I ran out and grabbed the dog. Then we watched the house for about 5 minutes before we decided to walk across the street to check on it. Thinking it was a glitch, we walk into the garage where I push the button to make it stop. Now, to explain my house, you walk into an entryway, and then the house is split level. You can go upstairs or downstairs. We walk upstairs, flipping on the lights and looking around, and there's nothing. Then we began to walk downstairs towards the basement. As I flip on the stairwell light, which has a dimmer on it, we see a shadow on the wall quickly move away from the bottom of the staircase towards the other side of the basement. My friend and I freak out and run out of the back door to my friend's house, where we wake her parents, who call the cops. They come and search the house. Nothing inside. However, they do find footprints in the snow all over the back deck, which wasn't shoveled, and the back door was found unlocked. Nothing was missing as far as we could tell, so I cannot imagine what he wanted. I didn't step foot into the house again until my parents came back home, and even then, I basically had to be bribed, not to mention my room was down in the basement. I slept in my parents' room for 2 weeks after that. Kind of funny thinking back on it, a teenager sleeping on the floor of their parents' bedroom. When I was a kid, I was living with my grandma in an apartment complex in a very poor area. It was a really bad neighborhood, but my granny and I were living in the nicer part, which really isn't saying much. The apartment complex was really small, 3 floors and 12 apartments all in all. But as the neighborhood wasn't exactly friendly, neither were the neighbors. We hardly knew anyone in the complex. People were constantly moving in and out before you even had a chance at saying hello. But then again, the few people we did say hello to were either creeps or criminals. I don't think we were missing out on much. The complex had a huge basement, and each apartment had their own room in the basement. The basement also had a laundry room. The entire basement was creepy as fuck, but it was really quiet down there most of the time. But anything going on in the complex would eventually manifest into sounds in the basement. On top of that, the heater, which was also down there too, was always making this sound like a dying cat, and every pipe and floorboard down there was really creaky. As a young child, my granny didn't allow me to go down there on my own. Not that I ever wanted to. Even before this particular incident, plenty of bad stuff had happened down there. People would often use the basement for illegal activities or to store drugs. A lot of people would move away without cleaning out their rooms, leaving behind the stuff to be found by the landlord. One time the landlord found a meth lab. Another time he found a batch of dead dogs, which apparently had been alive when the resident of the room had been living in the complex, but had starved to death once he had moved out. Anyways, I was 14 when I was first allowed down in the basement on my own. My grandma was getting old, and I was taking over more and more responsibilities at home. Doing laundry was always my biggest terror. Yet as time went by, I got more used to the sounds and the creaks down there. The basement was just a tiny bit less creepy. When I was 15, my grandma had won a new dining room table. Being the old-fashioned hoarder she was, she didn't want to part with her old set. Instead, she wanted it down in our basement room, which of course rested on my shoulders. I went down to our basement with a few chairs, and then into our room. That was when I first heard the noise. The reason I noticed it was that it was unlike any of the noises I usually heard down there. It was repetitive and seemed to have a pattern to it, not like the other noises, which seemed to be random. The noise was strong in our room, but not outside of it, like someone was knocking on the walls in the room next to ours. I put my ear to the wall, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. I remember thinking that perhaps it was rats or pests running around inside the walls. Like that, the pattern was even more obvious. 3 short knocks, then 3 long knocks, followed by 3 more short knocks. I immediately had the feeling like I heard that pattern before, but couldn't quite put my finger on why. I went back up to my grandma and asked her about it. She reminded me that it was Morse code for SOS, which she had taught me a long time ago. I told her I heard it down in the basement, and she went down there with me to investigate. When she heard it too, she called the police. Well, the police showed up with the landlord, then had each resident open their basement room. The residents that weren't home or otherwise unavailable had their basement rooms kicked open. In one of the rooms, the police found one of those big old-fashioned closets. Think of the one from the first Narnia movie. Inside they found a young woman who had been abused, starved, and pretty much tortured. The owner of the room was an elderly man who was living in the apartment above ours. As it turns out, she had been down there for at least 5 days, and while a lot of other people had apparently heard the noise, no one else had recognized it as an SOS signal. I'm a male, and I was 22 when this story occurred. The encounter happened when I moved back to my hometown after graduating. At first, I had moved back in with my parents until I found a job. At first, it was great seeing more of my parents, as I hadn't seen them much studying in a different city. But the novelty soon started to wear off, and I was missing the independence I had living in my own apartment when I was away. I found a job a few months after and decided I was going to find my own place and regain my independence. I began searching online and was looking at both letting agencies and private landlords, scoping around for places that were within my budget. I had gone for a few viewings that I turned down, as they weren't what I was looking for. This is when it happened. I came across an ad online for a place with a great location within my budget. The ad had contact details for Alan, with a standard-looking email address. I emailed Alan and found out the place is still available. I'm psyched and arranged a viewing. Alan doesn't work or live in the town and won't be able to meet me before 7 p.m. No problem. We can both do it the next night. So I show up to the address. It looks just like the photos from the outside. I'm getting more and more excited, and I can't believe my luck. I knock on the door, and a large man opens. I'm 6'1", 190 pounds, and this guy was towering over me, easily 6'4". He almost looks disappointed as he extends his hand. I'm Andy. The name was Alan on the ad. Not a red flag yet. Could just be he doesn't like advertising his real name. As I shake his hand, I say my name. He responds, "I thought you would be a girl. I have a unisex name." At this point, I'm assuming he prefers girls, as they tend to be tidier than guys. I say, "Don't worry, I'm quite OCD with my living space. I like to keep it clean." He just sort of nods, still looking disappointed, but as if he's trying to hide it. He seems uninterested as he shows me around the place. I actually really love it so far, but anytime I show my interest, he seems to be trying to put me off. For example, I said I love the big windows, and he responds with telling me that they can be drafty sometimes. Just small things like that. I'm still brushing this off as him thinking I won't be as clean as a female tenant. We finish looking around the place and I tell him I'm really interested in renting, but first, I want to see the basement. It was advertised with spacious basement in the listing. He then states that there is no basement. I just look at him confused and point out it's stated on the ad, and there's a door in the apartment that he didn't open during the tour, which I'm assuming is the basement entrance. He's beginning to act a bit sketchy and says he's reconsidering including the basement and that he might be just using it for storage instead. The basement was a big positive for me on the ad, as I pictured man-caving it or throwing parties down there with friends. As the apartment is in my budget, I say I would really like to see the basement, and if I liked it, we could possibly work something out, like me paying more to include the space with the rent. He seems unsure, but as I'm being adamant, he finally relents and says he will show me, but first he has to go down and tidy up. At this point, I'm reconsidering hanging around, as it seems like a red flag, but at the same time, he said he was going to use it for storage, so I figured it might be a bit messy down there. So I decide to wait. Andy disappears into the dark basement. I'm waiting for a light to flicker on when he reaches the bottom of the stairs, but it stays dark, and I hear some shuffling around for a minute or so, and then the light comes on, and he shouts up that I can come down. I begin to get this really uneasy feeling, and I'm considering leaving, but I brush it off because I do still really dig this apartment. I head down the stairs and reach the turn near the bottom, when Andy perks up. "Watch your feet." That's when I look down and notice it. There's a thin line of that plastic kind of clear wire stretched across the stairs. You know, the kind that's used for washing lines. It runs across about ankle height, right before the bend, and tied around the ends and secured by screws. He sees the what the fuck look on my face and quickly chimes in that the last tenant had a dog and he painted models or something down there. The wire was there to keep the dog out, and he hasn't had a chance to remove it yet. Pretty flimsy excuse, considering the ad said no pets. I'm thinking the only reason he didn't remove it was because I was at the top of the stairs and I would have seen. Obviously at this point alarm bells are ringing, so I don't wander far from the bottom of the stairs. Andy says, "Well, here it is," and a minute later is quickly trying to usher me back up the stairs. Relieved, all I see down there is boxes and a tied-up bin liner. Typical storage stuff. No weird smell or anything. Just a normal-looking basement. But then I notice it in the corner, just as I turn to go back upstairs. There's an old mattress poorly propped up in the far corner, with a sheet covering it, but you can see the bottom corner, and it's clear what it is. It looked like he tried to hide it with a sheet, but couldn't see in the dark. We head back upstairs, me leading, and I remember to step over the wire. Andy immediately closes the door. "We'll get in touch if you want the place, and maybe we can work something out with the basement." He's acting super sketchy at this point, and I can tell he wants me out right away. So I say, "Sure, it's a lovely place. I'll be in touch. Nice meeting you." Then I'm quickly ushered out. I called my best friend when I left and told him what happened, and that Andy might be planning on luring a girl down there and tripping her on the stairs to do God knows what. He says maybe I'm being paranoid, but it does sound sketchy as fuck. I decide better safe than sorry and call the police station on the non-emergency number and explain to them what happened. The police thank me and say they'll check it out, but they really don't sound sincere. I expect to hear a follow-up. I called back about a week later to inquire, and they told me they can't release any information. But I keep an eye on the local news, and nothing comes up that sounds like Andy. The ad did get removed the next day, though. Maybe I put him off the idea. Maybe it was me being paranoid, and maybe there was nothing malicious afoot, or maybe Andy followed through with his plan and was never caught. This happened a couple of years ago, and it's time to get it off my chest. I was around 18, and for a period of time I was very physically active. I had struggled with some bad habits brought on by excessive partying, and exercise proved to be very helpful in this regard. I went jogging on a regular basis in the ever so peaceful Scandinavia. I was out all by myself jogging in the woods. There wasn't a soul in sight, so my class didn't start around till noon, so I went out for a morning jog, broad daylight and everything. I went on my bike to the tracks and left my bike at the jogging station. I don't know what else to call it. There was a small red cottage where different outdoor clubs hang out. As I'm about to enter the tracks, there are two middle-aged men sitting by the cottage. I glance at them only to find myself locking eyes with one of them. The way he looked at me was deeply disturbing. It was only for a moment, but I'll never forget how I felt when his eyes pierced right through me. My gut is making an honest effort trying to tell me something is off about this whole situation. These men were wearing jeans and leather jackets. They weren't there for the sake of exercise. But I brush it off, thinking I was just overreacting. I was wrong. I had only been jogging for a couple of minutes when I suddenly felt like turning around. And there they were, in a white minivan, following me on the tracks. I was doing my best trying to think of a logical, non-threatening reason for them to be following me, but I couldn't think of anything that made sense. So I'm trying to work out what on earth I'm going to do. I don't want to make it obvious that I'm downright terrified. If I start running as fast as I can, I'm turning myself into prey. No one else was there. Absolutely no one. It wouldn't matter how loud I screamed. Fortunately, I've been on these tracks a number of times, so I know there's going to be a sharp curve not too far away. So I try to act as if I'm not the least bit bothered by the whole situation. As soon as I pass the curve and I'm out of their vision for a short while, I sprint into the woods as if my life depended on it, and hide behind a small rock. I'm crouching down as I see the white vehicle pass the sharp curve. Soon they're out of my sight, but I dare not move. I know that when they pass the curve and notice I'm nowhere to be seen, they'll know I've run off somewhere. After the curve, the trail is in a straight line for quite some time, so they'll know I'm not on the tracks anymore. I stay put, thinking that if they're after me, they will come back, and if I'm overreacting, they'll carry on doing whatever it is they were doing, and I won't be seeing them again. But the white van came back. This is the point where my memory becomes a bit vague. I wasn't even breathing, dreading the slightest movement would give me away. I can't fully remember if the van stopped and one of the men stepped outside, or if they simply passed the curve again very slowly, looking for me. But I do remember that when the van went back where it came from, I was somewhat relieved, though still a bit worried. The thing is, all tracks went back to the cottage, where these men are likely to be. I then decide to carry on deeper into the woods, glancing over my shoulder every now and then to make sure no one was there. My sense of direction is somewhat okay when I'm in a forest, otherwise I'm useless. Anyway, I know that there will be a highway if I just keep going. I reach the highway and I made my way home from there. It usually takes half an hour walking from where I live to the tracks, but this journey home took about 3 to 4 hours, but I can't remember if I ever went back to get my bike. I don't know what intentions these men had, and I don't know what was in that van. This happened in the summer of 2013. I was attending a large university in the US, living with one of my best friends in a small, rather dingy apartment building. I absolutely loved the apartment, as it was cozy and had a perfect location and a great balcony. A large part of this story happened to my roommate. My building was in such a perfect central location, many people would come and go on their way to and from parties. We had many visitors that pre-gamed here and would crash afterwards. I mostly stayed in, doing psychedelics on the weekends, but I loved the company. I started having an open-door policy. I know, you can roll your eyes. I gave a ton of people the code to my building and never locked my door. Incredibly, this never backfired. Fast forward to that summer. As with many college towns, the population took a huge dip during the summer, though my roommate Stephanie and I had always stayed. I was moving into a large house, and the lease started in May. Stephanie was dating a friend of mine named Jim, who was moving into the house with me. She was going to be living in the apartment alone over the summer. There was a girl who lived directly across the hall from us all year, and she was great. She had some friends in common, and she would ask us for things like bottle openers, or to check her mail over the break, etc. This summer, she had subletted her place to someone she had went to high school with. This person had a few roommates, and immediately we noticed that they partied pretty hard. We did too, so we never took much notice. Before long, we knew that they were selling drugs. People were always going in and out at all hours of the night. As someone who is experienced with drug use, I knew these people weren't just selling weed. The customers seemed hardened and strange, and would sometimes show up around 3 or 4 a.m. We noticed the door to the building was always being propped open. We started hearing from our mutual friend that the subletters weren't keeping up their end in rent and often had broken appliances and windows, etc. This all started when I moved to my new house. A few weeks after I moved, Stephanie was awakened around 3 a.m. to a heavy knocking on the door. Unlike me, she locked and chained the door at all times. She slowly made her way to the door to look out the peephole, but didn't see anything. She turned around to go to her room when the knocking started again, just as loud. Again, no one was visible. This time she waited. Still looking, she saw a hooded figure move into view. Our hallway was dimly lit, but this person had the hood on so low over their face that you couldn't see any features. They knocked a few more times, then tried the locked doorknob. They then slowly moved to the other 3 doors on our floor. Stephanie didn't call the cops, thinking that it was a friend who was trying to find the right place, and went to sleep. The next day, she awoke to a commotion in the hallway. Cops were everywhere. It turns out that the late-night visitor who was let into the apartment across the hall, the one selling drugs, had robbed and pistol-whipped everyone there. Everyone in the apartment had to be hospitalized. So yeah, always make sure you lock your doors. Here's a creepy incident that I endured some years ago, but the following events happened to me in 1999 when I was 24 years old. It's important to mention that I had an average build, and I was never really a tough guy. I was working graveyard shift at a motel in Oregon. My job title was night auditor, as I was expected to compare the daily revenue to the figures in the computer. Occasionally someone would check in or out. I hardly ever saw anyone on my shift. My only other task was to walk around the property every couple of hours to make sure nothing unusual was going on. Checking the darkened property at night was always a bit creepy. The motel had a lot of rooms, and the large parking lot offered a many great hiding spots for someone who might be lurking. My first few months I had to chase the occasional bum off our property, or out of the lobby. They always wanted shelter and free coffee, but my typical night was extremely uneventful. Nonetheless, I was nervous about being antagonized by violent-prone weirdos, so I bought a big can of pepper spray and a mag light. It was one of those big black police-style flashlights. One night at 3 a.m., I stepped outside to check the property. It was midwinter and very cold, so I wore my coat. On the opposite side of the parking lot, a large man in a green t-shirt and jeans was marching purposely toward one of the buildings. I thought it was odd that he was outside in just a t-shirt, since it was cold and my face was stinging. He then marched to a motel room door and tried to open it, and then the next one. "Excuse me," I said, somewhat with my voice raised. The man suddenly stopped, facing away from me, his hand still gripping the doorknob. I walked toward him, gripping my mag light and pepper spray tightly. It was obvious to me that this guy was up to no good. "May I help you, sir?" I added. The guy then turned around and faced me. He looked pretty muscular beneath a thick layer of body fat and had big curly dark hair with a thick handlebar mustache, and worst of all, was covered with blood. It was all over his face and the entire front of his shirt. Even his jeans were wet with blood all around the waist, groin, and hips, and his pant legs were streaked with blood right down to the cuffs. Worst yet, he looked at me with a crazed expression, his eyes widened with irrational rage, his teeth clenched and fully exposed. He looked like a 40-something-year-old escaped convict auditioning for the role of Carrie. The sight of this gore-soaked freak made me forget to breathe. He walked towards me with quick, long strides that prompted me to click my mag light on and shine it in his face. The light reflected brightly off his face, informing me that the blood was fresh. He was undaunted by the flashlight and maintained his course. "Sir," I said, "are you a guest at the motel?" He continued toward me. The closer he came, the clearer I could hear his manic breathing, which contained a growl with each exhaustion. I felt it was obvious that he was going to attack. "I have pepper spray, and I'm ready to use it," I shouted. His growling became more vocal, and he seemed to hasten his step. At this point, he was about 20 feet away from me. A quick side note about the pepper spray. I bought that particular can because the label claimed it would fire a stream accurately up to 15 feet. The blood-covered man raised his gnarled, bloody hands toward me as though he intended to claw my face apart. I then pressed the button on my pepper spray can, aiming it high as to hit his face. The stream was very powerful and even had a bit of recoil that kicked my hand back. The beam from my maglite was aimed at his face, so I could see the stream of liquid blast him directly in the eyes. It was so forceful that much of the blood that was on his face was instantly washed away. He emitted a long, loud shriek of rage and raised his hands to his face. "I'm going to call the police." I announced that in case he intended to resume his approach once his pain had subsided.
"Don't think this is over,"
he growled. He turned and faced me with one eye partially open and a large gob of mucus hanging from his nostrils.
"You are a dead man,"
he hissed. He faced the exit of the parking lot and staggered toward it. I rushed into the lobby, locked the big glass doors, and called 911. They told me they would send officers to make a report. The cops arrived minutes later. They took my statement. They were very interested when I told them he was covered in blood. They said they might be in touch later if someone turned up injured or worse. Thankfully, I never heard from them. I don't know if the blood on the whack job was the result of an injury he had sustained or if he had hurt somebody, and I couldn't say if he was legitimately insane or if he was out of his mind on hard drugs. All I know is that he was too out of sorts to wash or even wipe the blood from his face, so I shudder to imagine what he would have done if he had made his way into an occupied room, or if he had managed to get his big bloody hands on me. This happened to my father one stormy night in Glenwood, Colorado. It was the 1980s. My father was an electrical engineer who was just returning from a job site. He worked long hours, and it wasn't uncommon for him to be heading home around midnight to the small cabin he shared with a friend tucked back in the canyon walls. It was pouring rain. Lightning flashed only to illuminate the murky, puddled patches of washed-out terrain. As my father rounded the corner upon the dirt road, he passed a large willow tree. As his headlights crossed its base, he noticed someone was crouched underneath it. It was a woman who seemed to be in her late 20s, with long tangled blonde hair. She had on fairly casual clothing and carried a somewhat large bundle under her arms wrapped in cloth. My father, being the gentleman that he was, decided to pull over and offered her to take shelter from the storm in his cabin just up the road. She smiled and thanked him as she got into his vehicle. She explained that she had been on a hike through the canyon that day when the storm hit, and she had been caught off guard by the rain. Dad smiled and pointed out that she wasn't exactly wearing the best clothing or shoes to go on a hike. She laughed and said that she had left her place on a whim unprepared. He asked if she needed him to dry anything at his place, pointing to the bundle she held tightly under her arm. Her voice suddenly got very stern and stated no. When my father asked her where she lived around the area, things started to get strange. She started telling my dad that she had no friends or family in the area and was quite vague when asked about details of where she lived. All she responded with was that it was too far to drive to tonight in this kind of weather. At this point, my dad said he felt that she was a bit off, but chalked it up to her exhaustion from hiking and standing out in the storm for several hours. As they entered the cabin, my dad remembered that his roommate had left that morning to take a trip out of town and wouldn't be back for several days. My dad would have offered her his friend's room, but wouldn't feel comfortable doing that without her permission. Remember, this was the 1980s. Pocket cell phones weren't on everyone yet. My dad told her that she was welcome to sleep on the couch and dry off as he handed her several towels. She took them from him with her right hand, but still never let go of the bundle she hugged under her left arm. My dad at this point realized that she had never given him her name, so he introduced himself. "Nice to meet you. My name is Mary Lou," she replied. My father started to feel a bit more at ease and turned on the television for her and handed over the remote. She scanned through the channels, finally deciding on a gangster flick. There was a scene that involved a bunch of mobsters getting shot to pieces. Mary found this to be quite amusing and started to laugh in a crackling, high-pitched tone. My dad started to get a bit creeped out by this. She was enjoying it a little too much, he said. Then my dad asked her about her life, and things took a turn for the worse. When asked if she was in a relationship, she pointed down at her belt buckle and told my dad the story of her breakup. She claimed her last boyfriend wanted to be domineering over her, and to this she responded by bludgeoning him half to death in his gravel driveway with her belt buckle, the same one she was wearing. He kept saying stop, please stop, and begging, but I wouldn't show him mercy, she said, with a note of pride in her voice. My dad asked if he had been abusing her, or if she was reacting defensively, and she merely scoffed and said, "No, otherwise he would be dead." My father's unease grew as the conversations progressed. She told him about her mother dying on the operating table and how the surgeon who had been working on her walked out covered in blood and said that she would be fine. "How is she supposed to be okay with all of her guts in the trash can?" she spewed. Then she laughed again, glancing back at the TV screen, littered with disheveled, bullet-ridden corpses. "I love the sight of blood. It excites me, turns me on, you know. Death. Draining them to death." At this point, my dad was officially done. He was bigger and stronger than she was, and he was quite streetwise as well, and had seen plenty of horrors in his life. But the way she spoke with a violent confidence, combined with her sure grip upon the bundle which lay under her arm, sent chills down his spine. He needed a plan. Finally, an idea popped into my father's head. "I have a friend who's a priest in town. He has access to plenty of shelters funded by the church. You would be a lot more comfortable there instead of on our couch. They can feed you too, and arrange a ride for you to get home in the morning. I can call him right now. He's only a few miles from here," he stated reassuringly. Mary Lou's tone brightened to match his. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you so much." My father smiled, hiding his relief. "Of course, it's the least I could do for you." As my dad walked over to the phone and began to dial the number, Mary Lou erupted in a low guttural growl. "I hate priests. I hate priests." She said it with a tired hatred, a clear, distinct, audible, whispered disdain from the bottom of her heart with an unflinching resolve. My dad had enough. This wasn't a game to play anymore. This was beyond a stranger with odd tendencies. A darkness with coiled cruelty had crossed the threshold of his door. "You need to leave, and you need to leave now," my dad said, pointing to the front of the cabin. "There's the door. I can't have you here and feel comfortable. I'm sorry, but the storm has stopped, and I hate to have you walk in the dark, but that's the way this has to go. Please leave." Mary Lou gazed upon him, expressionless, and finally just shrugged. My father walked her out, standing close to her, in the event that the bundle concealed some type of weapon. He wasn't taking any chances. She smiled at him as she slowly walked onto the front porch. "Goodbye for now. I'll see you when I see you," she said calmly. With that, she walked down the long dirt road, with a single streetlight upon its path. She looked back at him one last time before crossing the light and disappearing, enveloped by the darkness with no trace of her to be seen. My dad called the police the next day, concerned that she may still be hiding on his premises somewhere, after speaking to his girlfriend about it, who is now my mom, and being convinced by her that she was going to cut the window screen when he was gone, hide in the house, and then kill him. They found nothing, and said the area attracted a lot of transients and nomads. My father then made the mistake of telling his engineer buddies at work, which resulted in them bidding him farewell at the end of each shift, in the form of asking that he say hi to Mary Lou for them. My dad never saw her again. He still questions what could have been in that bundle that she so adamantly protected. He will never know. A couple of years ago, one of my closest friends relocated across country with his long-term girlfriend to work a job he couldn't refuse. The only issue he had was that he didn't want to fly his dogs out when they made the move, since they would be staying in a hotel for the first month. He was also a bit reticent to fly them out due to health concerns for both pets. By the time he located a home to rent, he was already missing his furry buddies, and made the request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. Now, we are in Chicago, folks, so the trip would be a long one. However, with the three of us to foot a near 30-hour drive, it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we would foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we would let our friend's sister do some driving. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rent agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop every so often, aside from an 8-hour stay at a Denver La Quinta Inn. As for the journey itself, it was relatively smooth, bearing being pulled over right before entering Utah for driving 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. Whoops. From that point we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without much trouble, until we entered California in need of gas. I had been driving for the majority of the first day, and I tagged my buddy in after being pulled over. I remained in the shotgun seat as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. We kept our eyes peeled for road signs, and finally discovered a sign that pointed to a Yarmo ghost town, or something along those lines, which had a mobile station. How wonderful. It was convenient too, as it was located almost directly off of the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes when we approached the pumps. Normally we would let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before then, and with both dogs sleeping in the back, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulls up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan, with a short, plump gentleman who just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoopties at the pumps, all unoccupied, and there were a couple of other cars parked near the station, most likely belonging to the employees, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is until I swiped my credit card. The pump rejected my first swipe attempt, which I chalked up to a misread. I swiped it again, and the pump reads out, "Please see attendant." I was annoyed, but we needed gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing, and I asked if anyone needed anything. I walked up to the store and made a mental note of how strange this gas station was, kind of quiet, especially for one right off the interstate. But that's no matter. As I walked in though, more weirdness. First thing I noticed was that there were some boxes of chips left on the floor, like someone was stocking shelves and just quit. I noticed immediately that there was no one milling about in this place. With the 6 cars besides my own out there, I felt like I would see someone. Things got even weirder when I realized that there was no one behind the counter. No customers or workers. Then it dawned on me. What happened to the gentleman who was at the gas pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. This is where I began to feel a growing sensation in my stomach. Something isn't right. I have always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to just get the hell out. I want to run, but I hold back. I will look suspicious booking it out of a gas station that was empty, and I decided to just play it cool, natural, and not letting my body language let on how bad I was freaking out in my head. I was probably inside of this gas station for only a couple of minutes when I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen for something. Anything. A flushing toilet would have been a good sound to hear, but there was nothing. As I exited the shop and see my car, I began to feel dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebrity fanfare disappears, and in that silence, something comes and strikes them down. I'm about 25 yards away from the car when I see this man come out from around the side of the shop that was opposite to me. This is not the same man I saw when I was at the gas pump. He was larger and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I can describe it, it was like Nick Cage's smile from Face Off. I continued walking toward my car, but when I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me with a purpose. At this point, I noped my way back to the car with increased urgency in my step. And of course, my friend has the door to the car locked like a complete douche clown. There is also a 95-pound golden Labrador in my seat. Apparently, my travel companions did not notice how freaked out I was, or the creepy man still walking in my direction. I punched the window and told them to unlock the fucking door, to which he only half rolls down the window to tell me the dog was in my seat, and they were afraid she would jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could, while my friend is just now realizing how freaked out I am. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back, and I see Nick Cage had stopped about a pump away from where we were, still with that same look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly creeping out my friends with the story while I pumped gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It's been about 15 minutes since we pulled out initially, and we all go silent when we notice those exact same cars sitting in the exact same spots when we had left them. After being freaked out for a few miles, I receive a phone call from my credit card company telling me about a $100 charge at a mobile station. The lady on the phone was very helpful in fixing the issue for me, and was entirely creeped out by the situation as we were. In the end, we made it to LA and had a great vacation, but it still bothers me as to what the hell was going on at that gas station off the highway, and what the hell was that smiling man's story. Let's start off with some background information. I'm a 19-year-old male living in a semi-large city in Ontario. It was around 11 at night, and I had just got done working out at the gym. I went to the grocery store to pick up some food for the next couple of days. While at the grocery store, I decided to get $120 cash back, money that I owed my mom, and unknown to me, as I left the store, money that I came so close to losing. Instead of going straight home, I decided to go for a little drive. I just got my car not long ago and the novelty of driving stick hadn't worn off yet. After about a half hour of driving around in the city, I decided it's time to head home. As I passed the gas station on the edge of town, but still close to my house, I decided now's a good time as any to pull in and fuel up. I pull in and I notice that I'm the only one at this gas station. I'm in a very industrial business part of town, the edge like I said, so there isn't much around. There's an empty lot without light beside the gas station, and I noticed an SUV sitting there. I would say about 100 to 200 meters away, but I don't think much of it. I get out and start pumping gas, and that's when I noticed a woman come around the corner and walk straight towards me. As soon as I noticed her, a shiver ran down my spine. I instinctively locked my car. She walked towards me quickly, hands in her pockets, staring at me pretty intensely the whole time. I got in a fight with my boyfriend and he left me here. Can you give me a ride to my mom's house? She said casually in her raspy smoker voice. Another chill ran down my spine as she repeated the question, almost word for word, in that same raspy voice. I have to pump gas first, I said to her, keeping my eyes on her the whole time. She then walks around the passenger side door beside me and grabs onto the door handle. Can you unlock your car door? I'm cold and I've been here for a while. I have to pay for gas, I said, deciding to cut the gas pumping short. I walk inside and talk to the guy behind the counter. I told him that the girl outside was kind of suspicious, and I didn't know her. He just kind of shrugged, and I could tell he wasn't interested in getting involved, so I walked out. I figured she was probably high or something, but I would have to find a way to just get her to leave me alone. As I walk out, the SUV that I mentioned earlier started up. I watched the driver maneuver himself so he could just drive out the exit. He then stopped, engine still running. He was still about 100 meters away. "Can you open the door now? I'm really cold." So many alarm bells were going off in my head already. First, she just looked sort of sketchy. She was dressed well enough, but her face was pretty rough. She was pretty much covered in makeup, but it didn't hide a nasty-looking sore on her lip. Her sunken eyes were dull and bloodshot, and just dead-looking. Second, she didn't seem like a damsel in distress. She didn't seem upset, and she spoke without much emotion. "No, that's not my problem. I need to go home," I said to her, as firmly as I could. "Come on, you're driving me home, right?" "I can't. I have to get home now." Reaching for my phone, I realize I left it in the car. "I'm cold. I've been out here for hours," she shouts, pretty angrily for someone who's asking for a favor. Then I notice her glance at the SUV. I begin to speculate what's going on, and raised my voice a bit. "That's not my problem." I'm now standing at the driver's side door. "I'm freezing. You said you would drive me home." "That's not my problem." I started to raise my voice, and she started to raise hers. We weren't yelling, but it was getting heated. We went back and forth like that for a couple of minutes. My mind was racing. I thought about losing my car, about getting stabbed or shot, about getting robbed for the $120 I had in my wallet. Then I just lost it on her. "Get the fuck back. You don't know who I am. Get the fuck back right now." I guess I was in fight mode at this point. I was pretty ready just to fucking clock this bitch if she tried anything, as awful as that may sound. I think I caught her off guard or something, because she stepped back right away. "You better get out of here right now then," she said, walking backwards. I instantly felt my balls tingle sadly and climb back up inside me after she said that. I was now out of fight mode and into fucking flight mode. I watched her until she got a decent distance away, noticing she was walking sort of towards the SUV. I didn't watch for much longer. I hopped in my car and peeled the fuck out of there. I turned into a random subdivision, making sure I wasn't being followed. I called the cops and they said they would send a car, but there wasn't much they could do because there was no real crime committed. But I did the right thing, and she was most likely bait for some kind of robbery. I then drove home as fast as I could. Sorry if this was a bit wordy. I'm still obsessed with the details of what happened, and that's what's got me so disturbed. The emotionless way she spoke, the creepy way she looked, that SUV. I'm surprised I didn't just burst into fucking tears. I mean, I've been jumped before, but this just seems so crazy and predatory. The last thing she said to me absolutely haunts me. "You better get out of here right now then." Laying it all out like that, so suddenly giving up the damsel in distress act, has to be the worst part of this, for me. This story is 100% true. Even though I was only 8 years old at the time, I can recollect every chilling detail. I moved to a new town. This town was much nicer, cleaner, and quieter than the one I lived at before. Not the sort of town you would expect to have things wrong with it. There was a very big public park right in the center. It housed rows upon rows of swings, slides infested with snake-like tunnels that weaved in and around the playground, providing a maze for children to lose themselves in their games. There was even a functioning merry-go-round, which seemed to always be slightly turning, inviting the children to hitch a ride on its platform of twirls. I have to emphasize on the fact that it was a quiet, peaceful town, the kind of town where kids could leave their house on their own and take a short journey to the park. I had been given strict instructions by my parents that I should come home the second it started turning dark. My life was wonderful, or so it seemed. It was a Friday. I knew the day because I remember coming home with a big smile on my face, as I knew I had the luxury of non-stop playing for the next 2 whole days. I did what I always did. I chucked my school bag on my bed, changed my clothes, and in a matter of minutes, I was ready to descend into a world of fun. Nothing could stop me. The tunnels were my favorite. It was so easy to get lost in them, which made great fun for playing hide-and-seek with my only 2 friends, Billy and Tom. They were both in my class, and we, like many 8-year-olds, loved games that filled us with pure adrenaline. We were going to play murder. I don't expect anyone to know this game. We made it up. The rules were very similar to hide-and-seek, except when the one seeking found you, they had to murder you. It was only pretend, obviously. It was nearing winter, as I remember being slightly cold as I wormed my way around the tunnels, furiously trying to find a perfect hiding spot. Billy was the seeker. Tom had hidden behind the merry-go-round. I was alone. It must have been maybe 10 minutes, which for an 8-year-old felt like a year, when I decided to do what all kids do when they get bored. "I give up," I shouted, my voice echoing through the tunnels. "I'm in the tunnels. I give up." I then heard shuffling from one end of the tunnel. I don't know why, but I froze still. I didn't call out again. I just waited. Something wasn't right. Billy would always say something before coming in after someone in the tunnel. He would always congratulate them on being the last to be found, or for cheating by hiding in the endless maze of tunnels. As I stood frozen, the shuffling grew louder. I could tell it was starting to get dark outside, as the tunnels began to slowly but surely drop into darkness. I began to slowly shuffle backwards. The shuffling ahead of me grew louder, as if someone or something way too big for the tunnel was trying to navigate through them. "Come out. It's time to go home now." A very creepy voice echoed through the tunnels. It sounded like when a grown man talks to small children, talking slightly higher pitched. It was definitely wrong. I probably would have came out if the voice was outside, but it wasn't. It was coming from inside the tunnels. Why would an adult crawl inside? I was shuffling further and further back when the face of an old man appeared in the darkness ahead of me. Patches of hair on his head, and a definite look of someone who hadn't showered in the last week. I couldn't see what he was wearing, but I knew it was tattered, old clothes. He had a scraggly beard, which was peppered with dirt. The second we made eye contact, he just smiled at me, revealing his filthy unbrushed teeth, which had blotches of brown and black covering them entirely. I panicked. I turned around and began shuffling on all fours as fast as I could, the shuffling behind me growing even louder and quicker. He was chasing me. I sped through the maze for what felt like an eternity. I only stopped when my legs refused to move anymore. I had taken so many twists and turns that even I was completely lost. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to talk," the voice echoed through the tunnels. I could tell he was nearby. I pressed my body against the bottom of the small, narrow tunnel and listened. He continued to make soft, cooing noises, begging me to come out and present myself to him. I lay in that tunnel for hours. No exaggeration. Even after I heard him curse to himself and angrily force his way out of the tunnel, I continued to wait. Thoughts raced through my mind of me coming out of the tunnel, only to be met by the same smile that once greeted me. In the darkness of the tunnel, I could make out blue flashing lights on the outside. I heard frantic voices calling 3 names repeatedly. Billy? Tom? Michael? When I heard my name, my heart slowly began to calm. My parents had come. I easily shuffled out of my hiding spot, guided by the wet dirt scrapings along the walls of the tunnel, the way the man must have gone. Outside, I was greeted by several police cars and lights flashing. There were groups of adults with concerned looks on their faces. I recognized 2 of them, my parents. "Mom, Dad, I wailed, crying as I ran toward them. They began crying and ran towards me, lifting me off the ground and hugging me so tight it felt as though I was being crushed. Billy and Tom were taken that evening. Their bodies were later found hidden nearby, mutilated. They had been brutally massacred. Their skulls had been caved in with a large iron bar, and their bodies had deep cuts everywhere, large pieces of glass found buried in their backs. What chills me to the fucking bone is that the wet dirt I saw in the tunnels wasn't entirely dirt. Some of it was Billy and Tom's blood. After slaughtering my two best friends and making eye contact with me in that tunnel, he just smiled. He had won the game. This story is from a female's perspective. To preface, I was about 25 years old when this happened. My boyfriend and I had been out visiting with friends, and we left their house late, around 2 a.m. Now, I've never been much of a drinker. I was addicted to opiates at the time, but that's neither here nor there, so I did the driving. On our way back, we decided to call in some omelets from the Waffle House, which is the only place where we can get takeout in the super early morning. We arrived at the Waffle House and I went inside to pick up our orders. As I was paying for the order, a young man to my left began pacing and mumbling angrily, muttering something I couldn't understand. I didn't really think much of it, since most diner patrons are either drunk or truck drivers at that time of day. When I collected the food and turned to leave, I noticed a young woman outside of the diner. She too was angrily pacing back and forth, grimacing and cursing. The young man followed me out into the parking lot. I sidestepped the woman to get to my car. The young man had gotten into another car, and the young woman sat in the passenger seat. Whatever, I thought. Tweakers. The car with the two tweakers screeched to a halt behind my car, pinning us to the parking spot. Within seconds, the man was knocking ferociously on my driver's side window and yelling at me. My boyfriend and I exchanged what the fuck glances, and I rolled down my car window about an inch. The conversation went something like this. "You stole my girlfriend's wallet, and you better give it fucking back right the fuck now." "I have no idea what you're talking about. I have my own wallet, that's it." "You fucking stole it from the counter, and we're getting it back, one fucking way or another." "Dude, I didn't steal shit. Move your car or I'm going to back into it." "You give it to me right now, or give me yours or you're fucking dead." I rolled up the window and backed my car up a few inches. He continued to scream at me through the window, then leapt back into his car with his girlfriend. They peeled backwards and exited the parking lot. At that point, my boyfriend and I were amused more than anything else, and we re-entered the highway. Just then, we heard the same car roar up behind us. The man was driving like an absolute maniac to dodge other cars, traffic lights, and stop signs, until he got so close to us that their car nearly rammed into our back bumper. I weaved in and out of the sparse traffic as safely as I could in an attempt to throw them off our route. Each time, he managed to pull up behind us again. He clicked his brights on and off and leaned on his horn. Inside our car, it was blinding and deafening. I sure as hell wasn't going home so that these tweaked, unhinged people would know where I lived. I swear it was almost like I could still hear him screaming, even over the blaring car horn. My boyfriend and I didn't do much talking, as I suppose we were both shocked and trying to figure out what to do. "Fuck this," I told him. "We're going to the police station." I doubled back, the car still bearing down on us. When I pulled into the police station, they followed. I locked my car doors. I picked up my cell phone and began to ring the station, because I sure as shit wasn't going to get out of my car. The man practically ran out of his car up to my window, again, banging and yelling. At this point, I had gone way beyond concerned and scared to absolutely pissed. "We want our goddamn money. You leave me the fuck alone. I'll let the fucking cops search me for your girlfriend's fucking wallet." The man then went silent. "I'm on the phone with the cops right now." If you don't have it, I guess you don't have it." He then sprinted back to his car with his sour-faced girlfriend and burnt rubber out of there. I stayed in the police station parking lot for a while, talking to the cops on duty. When we finally left at about 3:30 a.m., I still made several loops through our town before eventually heading home, arriving after 4 a.m. Legally, nothing came of the incident. I had no idea what the couple's names were, nor did I get a license plate number. We gave the cops descriptions of their physical appearances and vehicle, but they seemed far more interested in making sure I wasn't drunk. Thanks, fellas. I'm fairly certain that the maniac couple was pulling a strong-armed con job, or they were actually convinced that I'd mysteriously and magically stolen the girl's wallet, even though they were pacing and muttering as soon as I'd entered the diner, and even before I paid for the takeout, and that methamphetamine psychosis was responsible for the bizarre severity of their behavior. Anyway, fuck those assholes. My omelets were cold and rubbery by the time I got home. So a few years ago, I used to work at the Waffle House in a college town, so weird people aren't really that unusual. To start off, there are only two 24-hour restaurants there, and I used to work third shift at the Waffle House. Sometimes, when a person's car would break down, the police would drop them off at one of these two places. They weren't supposed to, so they would drop them off within walking distance, but not actually outside, like some shitty loophole. So one night I was working with a cook and another waitress. We'll call them Mark and Cassie. Around 11 p.m., this old guy wanders into the lobby with a little bag. First off, we usually don't get older people after around 8 or so at the latest. Second off, this dude is creepy as fuck. He starts off with telling us about how his car broke down on the highway, and the police dropped him off in the parking lot next door. I felt bad for him because it's the middle of the night, and he's not from around here, and he has no money. So I pour him some coffee free of charge. My coworkers are usually on drugs, so I assume free coffee isn't going to get me fired. This is when the guy just starts talking my ear off. I can barely get in a word edgewise, which is difficult since I'm usually the talker. He talks about what happened to him, and then starts trying to sell the tools he has with him in his bag. Of course we say no, but he just keeps asking about it. He also starts wandering in and out of the store. The first time he does, Mark, who's ex-military, searches his bag to make sure he doesn't have any weapons, because he's starting to raise some eyebrows. There was nothing but tools, so we start to feel a bit safer. When he comes back in, I keep talking to him. Mark and Cassie note the fuck away to the other side of the store and watch. Keep in mind, this guy is literally the only person here. We don't start getting people until 1:30, when everyone leaves the bars. Now he's starting to talk about a lot of weird things. I tell him I'm interested in studying prisons, and he tells me the best way to do so is to get arrested. He then starts talking about how he used to be in prison, but he never says why. He starts to make us really nervous, so I start to draw him in case the dude decides to murder us. We'll have something because I'm good at drawing things I can see. There's a low little wall where we usually write out customer receipts, so I can draw him without him noticing. Not that that matters since he's looking straight ahead while he talks to me. We start getting customers because it's about 1 a.m. The bar's lit out at 1, so anyone who drives gets there shortly after, while those who walk get there about 30 minutes later. And this guy keeps talking no matter where I am. He doesn't raise his voice or anything. He just keeps talking at the same level, even when I walk away to take care of other customers. At this point, I'm starting to think this guy is schizophrenic. I'm a psych major, so I mean actual schizophrenia, and not just crazy. And at this point, wanting to get away, but I really can't because I'm afraid he might do something. He does, but not what I was afraid of. He starts just insulting customers. He tells one kid that he's fat and starts asking him why he's so fat and tells him he needs to lose weight. He then talks to a family of travelers and says,
"Your wife and kids are fine, but why are you so ugly?"
We decide he has to go. Mark tells him he has to leave, as we've warned him several times to leave the other customers alone. So Mark tells him to leave, or we're going to call the cops. The guy starts yelling at us and glares at me and asks why he should leave, but he finally just does after a while. But he comes back at half an hour later and we have to kick him out again for harassing customers. He doesn't come back that night, so we decide he must have found a way home or contacted someone. So I finish around 7 a.m. and walk home. I live above the bars downtown, so it's a 30-minute walk, but along the way, I see the old guy. I dart behind a building and take the long way home. I don't think much of it because it's a small town and there's not a lot of places to go. I have to work again the next day, so I go home, sleep, get all my chores done, being an adult as usual. So about an hour before work, Waffle House calls me, and my coworker Kevin tells me the same old guy has been coming around several times during the day, every couple of hours looking for me. I'm a 23-year-old female, so they're worried about what he wants. I call my friend Jason and tell him why I need a ride, and he brings me in. I ask what's been going on, and apparently this guy has been in at least 10 times asking to talk to me. He never says why, so I'm on edge, waiting because I have no idea what this guy wants. Is this a 60-year-old guy pissed off because I didn't defend him when he was kicked out? Is he asking because I told him my name? Or is it something else? Surprisingly, for the first few hours of my shift, we didn't see him, but he eventually comes in and ignores me. I'm super confused, but I keep an eye on him again. I've also brought pepper spray. Before long though, we kick him out again for harassing customers. This is all very confusing for me. He's been asking for me all day and then ignores me when he comes in. But after we kick him out, he does not come back. When my shift ends, my friend asked me if I need a ride home. I tell him no. This guy has left and hasn't come back, so I'm good. Well, that's what I thought, until I saw him walking towards me after work. He yells out for me and starts coming at me, but I run inside a building that I know has another exit. I sneak out the other way before this guy can find me, and thanking every god I can think of that I know the small town better than him. I still have no idea what he wants, but I'm not taking any chances. I sneak home through some back ways. I call work and let them know what happened, and asked for the next few days off. They agree, and later tell me the old guy kept coming in for the next few days, and they finally called the police, and they took him away. After work, I like to go with co-workers to Waffle House sometimes. It's fun, relaxing, and relatively cheap. However, tonight I decided to go out with a couple of girls I work with. I don't have a vagina myself, but since we all closed up together, we thought we would go grab something to eat. So while we're eating, I'm facing the door, and in walk these two drugged out looking people, which isn't uncommon for Waffle House. But something about these two people in hoodies in the middle of summer in Texas really put me on edge. The two girls I was with were both pretty attractive, and the two guys also took note as they walked past. I've been in a couple of sticky situations and can always tell when shit is about to go down, and these guys gave off that vibe like no other. They sat behind me where I couldn't see them in any reflection. It was nerve-wracking. A few minutes went by before I realized that it was just our two groups in the restaurant. I glanced over my shoulder and saw they weren't eating anything, just drinking and staring at us. Fuck. I told the two girls I was with that we should try to hurry up and go because I was tired, trying not to freak them out, because assholes like those guys feed on fear. We got up, and I look over at them. They were still watching us with empty drinks now. At this point, I should say two things. I have an injured knee right now from practice that causes me to limp a little, and I train in Muay Thai boxing and compete internationally in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I am not one to be fucked with, but the limp definitely gives off the impression that I would be easy to overpower. So as we were paying, I noticed one of the guys point at me and make a stabbing motion, and the other guy smiled, and they both stood up and walked towards us. One of the girls I was with was making sexual passes at me, which were very visual. I told her to stop as these guys got closer. and I saw one lick his lips as the other held one hand in his pocket. I told the hostess to keep the change and hurried the girls outside while trying to hide my limp as best I could. We got to the parking lot, and I told one girl to go to her car and gave the other the keys to my car and told them to hurry up and get in since I couldn't run with my limp and that I would explain later. The guys came out as I was getting in my car, and I saw one of them pulling something out of his pocket and heard him yell something I couldn't make out over the sound of us noping the fuck out of there. I texted the girl who I wasn't taking home and explained the situation and why I was acting weird. I hate to think about what could have happened if I had not been paying attention to my surroundings. Bad shit almost went down because of, I'm assuming, crackheads at Waffle House.
There's always a reason to be afraid.